Well, time to work on another lawnmower. Now this lawnmower I bought a few years ago, and when I put this mower away a couple of years ago, it worked perfectly fine. I hadn't used it the past couple seasons because, well, one of my kids was mowing the lawn that I needed to use this on, and I had him using a self-propelled mower. So we didn't need this mower. Now I need this mower again. And I found the battery was dead, which I kind of expected from sitting for a while, and it's kind of dirty, even though I had it in this tent. Just the dirt blows, dust blows in there and everything. That didn't bother me, but when I tried charging the battery, didn't seem to really take a charge. Figured out the battery's bad. Bought a brand new battery, put the brand new battery in, and it was doing the same thing. Turn the key on, it does this click every few seconds. And turn the key to the start position, nothing. But I had noticed that I could see what looked like some debris from Mises sticking out from underneath the shroud on the engine here. So I pulled the shroud off, and look at what we've got here. Big old mouse nest. So my theory right now is that I got to shorten the wiring somewhere, and because there was no short in the wiring prior to putting it away, and the only thing that's happened between now and then that I can think of is that mice have gotten in there and chewed the insulation somewhere and caused a short. So that you can barely see underneath this pile of debris is the ignition coil, so I know wiring comes up to here. Also, I took this cover off and found bird seed, not bird seed, grass seed that I had a bag of that they had torn into and were eating, and mouse poop all inside there. No mouse nest in there. You can see there's a big opening here for them to get into. Cleaned all that out, inspected the wiring, give it a quick once over. It seemed okay. So now we're just gonna clean out this crud. Now that's a good one. That's a peanut shell. Now, I don't grow peanuts here on the plantation, so you must have got that out of the trash. Alright, need some compressed air or something. Well, unfortunately, the only wire that was underneath this mouse nest is the high tension wire going to the spark plug, which that, even if they chewed on the insulation, I mean, it wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't cause the short circuit in the ignition system. And this wire going to the coil right here, which I have now uncovered, and it does not appear to be damaged. Of course, I can't see all of it. There's also wires over here, and this plug. This goes to, so this is for the ignition system. This goes over to the two wires that are going over towards the coil, and probably the other wire probably goes to a points or a trigger, maybe underneath the flywheel. I don't know. But this plug right here will basically take all of that stuff out of circuit. Here's probably an electronic ignition module right here. If I turn the switch on, in a few seconds you'll start to hear a click. Hear that click right there? Now I remember that when the battery was really low, it would do that. But I think the other thing that will cause that, because right now the battery's not low, I think the other thing that will cause that is if there's a short in the ignition system. So I'm going to shut that switch off, and I'm going to unplug this plug and see what happens. See if that goes away. No, it's still there. Still no ignition. So I got a short somewhere else, I think. So when in doubt, seek knowledge. Okay, so I went and found a wiring diagram for this mower. This is the Ariens Zoom 1640 zero-turn mower, and after looking at the wiring diagram, it became evident to me that there is no protection relay or self-resetting fuses that I can see in the system. So I think my initial assumption that there was a short somewhere might have been wrong. I've decided to just ignore that clicking noise and pursue this from the standpoint of just regular diagnosis. So turning the key, nothing happens. So the first thing I got to do is make sure all the safety switches are working properly and bypass them if necessary. So I already did a quick check. There are 4 safety switches on this mower. The first safety switch is actually located right behind this arm right here, up underneath here, and this has to be in the neutral position over like this to engage that switch. This parking brake has a switch on it. The neutral safety switches here on the arms, they have to be activated in order for you to crank the starter. Also, the safety switch that's on the park lever has to be activated in order for you to crank the starter. And the seat switch, which is right here that I have unplugged, has to be activated in order for you to crank the starter. Also, not the neutral safety switches, but the seat switch and the park lever have to be activated for the PTO clutch to work. So you see, if I have the park lever off, PTO lever works. So I jumped out the seat switch with a piece of wire, so I don't have to worry about that. I noticed that with the switch on, if I put the park lever in park, that must be cranking position, because if I move these steering levers out of neutral, I can hear another relay clicking. So with the seat switch jumped, these 2 levers in this position, and the park lever on, this should crank. So now that I have it all set the way it should be, and it's not cranking, let me just plug this wire back in, not that this should make any difference. And it doesn't. Now I can just diagnose what's going on here with the solenoid. So the starter solenoid is down here. It's pretty simple. The power from the battery goes right to one terminal on the solenoid, comes out of the terminal, goes right over to the starter. So as soon as that solenoid is energized, that should cause the starter to crank. What I can do is I can put my meter right across the terminals on the starter solenoid and see if 12 volts is there when we crank the key. So there's 4 connections to the solenoid. There's 2 1/4-inch spade terminals right here, and then there's 2 lug terminals, or terminals that are just threaded rods with nuts on them, that these wires connect to. So this is the main power coming in to the solenoid, and when 12 volts is across these 2 terminals, the solenoid closes the contacts inside here and sends the 12 volts out this wire to the starter. So if I took these rubber caps off and put a screwdriver across between and bridge that, of course it would start cranking the starter unless the starter's bad. But what I want to do is I want to see whether or not we get 12 volts across here when we turn the key. If we do, then we've just got a bad or stuck solenoid. But the fact that when we click it, when we crank it, it doesn't even click at all. makes me think that that's not going to be it. But we'll go ahead and give it a try. Well, you're not cranking it, so turn the key to crank. Nothing. Okay. All right, we got 2 fuses right here. So first thing I'm going to do is pull these fuses and check them. Well, I didn't like that, huh?
I just turned it off.
Did you? Why didn't do that?
You pulled the fuses.
Yeah, I know, but that's kind of weird. I wonder why I did that. All right, you got it off?
Yeah.
I don't need to pull that. I don't need to check that fuse. Obviously, the fact that when I pulled it, it did that indicates that that fuse is good. Because if it was an open fuse, it would make no effect. It would make no change. This fuse is also good.
Maybe you have to bang that thing.
If I put 12 volts to this and it didn't move, then I would bang it to see if I could get it to free. But why would it move if there's no voltage going to it? So we gotta figure out why the voltage isn't getting there. If we use the battery as the negative terminal as a ground, let's see if there's 12 volts on either one of these. Oh, turn the key back on. Don't crank it, just leave it on. Yeah. Nothing there. Nothing there. All right, crank it. Hold it. Nothing. Nothing at all. All right, I just pulled this plug off of the bottom of the key switch, and these connections on this, the spade terminals, they look kind of corroded. So I'm going to clean those up. All right, I undid all these plugs, cleaned all these terminals, and put it all back together. Still no improvement. So now I'm going to zero in on this key switch and see whether or not this is the problem, because there seems to be a lot of corrosion on the bottom of that switch. I'm wondering if water and whatever got down in there and ruined that. So I've got a wiring diagram, and it's telling me it looks like this purple wire, which goes to 2 locations on the switch here. One location it goes to apparently isn't used. The other location it goes to, I think that's the crank solenoid, the starter solenoid. I'm sorry, the starter relay, which I think is this relay right here. So it looks like there should be 12 volts here pretty much all the time. This seems to be in common with the hour meter. So, although the hour meter might not run unless the motor's running. Honestly, don't remember. Well, anyways, let's see if there's 12 volts there. This is actually where the 12 volts comes into the switch, so.
Yep,
Yeah, we got 12 volts going there, okay. So, where does that 12 volts go out? Got to figure out what part of the switch is responsible for cranking. Well, I was just diagnosing this. This red wire is where the power comes into one of the contacts in the switch that's responsible when you turn the key to the crank position, and then the power comes back out on the brown. So I checked for voltage going in, got 12 volts. I put my meter lead on the connection here in preparation for checking for cranking, and did this, only to have it start cranking. So there's my bad connection right there. Just in time for supper. All right, getting kind of late and getting dark, but since I got the bad connection sorted out now, I spilled a little bit of gas down the carburetor. We'll just see if we can get it to pop off a little bit. I don't expect it to not need some attention as far as the carburetor goes.
Daddy, you fixed the starter?
Yeah.
What's wrong with it?
Huh?
What was wrong with it? Bad connection.
Well, it's the next day, and before I go through the trouble of removing this carburetor and cleaning it, I'm going to see whether or not we can get it to start just by putting some fresh gas through here. I'm pretty sure I had treated this gas with fuel stabilizer, but one whiff of the fumes out of these tanks tells me this gas just doesn't smell right anymore. So what I've done is I've got this little plastic tank here that I took off a lawnmower years ago. I use this as a little test tank, and I've got fresh gas in here. I've taken the fuel line off of the fuel pump, put it to this temporary tank. This uses a fuel pump that actually has a diaphragm that runs off of pulses from the crankcase to actually drive it. So when I crank the engine, that diaphragm moves and it's pumping fuel out of this point right here. So I've also disconnected the line that goes over to the crankcase so that this will stop pumping, because I don't want this spraying fuel all over the place. The reason why it has a pump is because the low points on these tanks, this has two tanks, a right and a left tank, the low points on the tanks are actually below the inlet on the carburetor, so we can't rely on gravity alone. By holding this tank up higher, we've got a little bit of gas in there, fresh gas, and we're letting that run in. If the float's not stuck, that bowl should be filling with fresher gas. I'm going to see if we can't get this thing to start and run off of that little bit of gas. Try and clear the system out. It is backfiring occasionally, so I'm going to get some hearing protection because it's loud as a shotgun blast. Well, kept pouring a little bit of gas down there and letting it sputter, and finally I think the fresh gasoline and the carburetor probably had kind of a solvent action and must have broke something free, because it seems like it's ready to start now. I hooked up the impulse line back to the fuel pump, and I hooked up the line back to the fuel pump from the carburetor. So now, let's see, I poured a little bit of fresh gas in here to mix with this stale gas. Let's see how bad that gas is.